All right, I am making an angel dragon suit, and what I have done so far is, on this particular suit, I have one dragon that's shiny. It's going to be the outside, and the other dragon is matte. A little slightly different look, so that's matte, shiny. This material is shiny on one side and matte on the other, so this one is matte on the inside, whereas this one here is shiny on the inside. So once we're done, the outside of the suit will be shiny and the inside will be shiny. And then the matte sides of the material will be on the inside of the inflatable chamber. So what I've done so far is, on the inside suit, I don't need a bunch of this stuff that sticks out, like the wings and there's like a bow with hair, and there's even some like horns. So all this stuff comes off of the inside layer, and this is what it'll look like once you do that. When I do this, I basically take a pair of scissors. I'm not going to actually do it because I've already done it, but I take a pair of scissors. I use some real little ones, and I cut first. I remove the little ring that goes around it. I just kind of cut real close to the factory seam, and then I carefully tear it, and it'll run along the seam. You can kind of tear it. When you get to a little factory seam like this, you'll have to cut, because it'll stop and it'll try to tear the wrong way. You'll have to cut across it, and then you can kind of keep just pulling, and as you pull, it should just keep following the factory seam. Same thing on this. When you go to remove this part, you'll cut into it, cut down towards the factory seam, and then just kind of tear it all the way off. And then you'll basically end up with just some remnants of where it was originally attached. So here's all the different pieces. There's some up here where the hair was attached. Back here where the wings were attached. Later on, we'll have to patch these holes. You could do that now if you want to. I usually try to patch them on both the inside and the outside, so you can just take a little circle of material and glue it. Make sure all the holes are sealed up. This one right here on the back of the head, don't worry about it, because the zipper is actually going to go through there. So just leave that one alone. You don't need to patch that, but all the other ones you should probably go ahead and patch. The next step is we will, oh, I also cut there was an inflation valve in the middle of the back. I cut that off. The next step is we're going to cut straight up the middle. There's no seam, so I have to kind of draw a cut. And what I do is I start just above the tail. There's a seam on the tail that you can use. So I use that as a reference, and then I just take either tape or a straight edge, and I draw a line that goes from that and then up here on the neck. There should be a seam that's midway right here. It stops right there. You could double check if you want to measure kind of between this point and this point, find the midpoint, but basically just use a straight edge and draw a line from there all the way down to the tail, and then cut that open. And in fact, you can keep going up the head from that same point up through. This thing should be roughly in the center, but don't count on it. You might want to use this seam at the top. That's where you're actually going to stop too, is when you're going to go up through this, and then when you get up to this line right here, you're going to stop. And so that's going to be the zipper, but we're also going to add material up to about this point here. We're going to add material to expand all this, because that's not big enough for a human to fit in. Not big enough at all. So we'll take some excess material, we're going to add in a piece, and we'll get into that later. All right, so the next thing is I got this cut open. This is just the inner layer. We're going to be doing the same thing to the outside layer here in just a second. But what I want to do is take a paper towel and either just some water, or I got some alcohol here. And I'm going to run this along where I marked, because I don't want to get this gel pen everywhere that I use to mark my line. It can kind of stain the vinyl, so if you leave it on there, it's going to end up, it never really dries. It's going to end up just kind of getting on everything and making a mess. So the next step is after we've, there you go. You can see I already made a mess, and I hope this comes off. It looks like it is. So yeah, we want to get this off, especially on this light colored material. It's a little more prone to getting stained. The next thing is we want to open up the arms, legs, neck. You can see right here, there's a baffle between. So we want to open this up. We want to open the arms and legs up. All right, so now I'm going to open up this neck baffle. And what I can do, if I can start just a little cut just to the side of the factory seam, I should be able to just pull it. And it's going to run all the way to the next factory seam and stop. I'm going to cut across that. And then pull that the rest of the way off. We'll save that material for later. So now the neck is open. A little bit more of that gel pen that got on other material. And then now we got the arms and legs to do. And they have these baffles like this. And so I'm gonna cut all the way to the edge. And then I'm going to start kind of cutting with it. And if I do just one layer at a time, it's a lot easier, but I didn't get close enough. Let's get this a little bit closer. All right, there's one, and then let's see if we get the other. All right, so that opens up that arm. We're gonna save this for later. We're actually gonna kind of cut some curved pieces from this that we're gonna then glue around here. The main body seams and the neck seam and the arms and the legs around here all have to be reinforced. Unfortunately, this suit, the very first one we made, just constantly developed holes on the body seams and the arms and leg seams. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that those are reinforced. The ones we have built since the first one, we've reinforced them. We've had zero problems with them. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the other arms and legs. All right, one thing I forgot to do, it's the last thing I need to do on this inside layer. I've got all the arms and legs opened up. But I've got this enormous tail. I do not need this tail. This tail is going to end up being extra material for us that we end up putting on the back, actually. So just like we removed the other pieces, I'm going to first cut this little ring off. Carefully get close, but not cut through the factory seam. That way we can tear it all the way around. It's kind of got away from the factory seam there. There we go. Removed the tail. Save that material for later. So now we're going to do all the same steps to this shiny one, the outer layer, but we're not going to remove any of this stuff. Actually, okay, there's one exception. We're going to remove this bow because we will reattach it later. So when you remove it, make sure you do it very nicely and carefully. But that's the only thing that we're going to detach. We are going to do the same cut in the back. You can go ahead and remove this because it's going to be right in the way of the zipper. And then, of course, once we open it up, we'll do all the same openings of the baffles to the head and the arms and legs that we did earlier. Okay, so this is only a step if it's an extended Angel Dragon. We're basically going to cut this thing in half, cut both of them in half actually. And what I've done here is I've taken some tape, and I wanted to make sure that it was, you know, kind of midway up the torso, because this thing is sort of hourglass shaped, and I want to add this extension kind of in the middle section. I've done this once before and that turned out pretty well. So what I'm going to do is just cut it in half, and the tape I wanted to put down first just so that I could kind of measure from the arm and from the leg and make sure that this is kind of centered all the way around. Otherwise it's going to be like tilted. So what I'm going to do now is take something that I can use as a guide. I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to take the second, this is actually, I decided to do the inside layer first. Then I'm going to take the outer layer and do the same thing. So you basically have a legs half of the dragon and then a upper body part of the dragon. And then we're going to add some extension pieces here in just a second. So go ahead and take the tape off, and then we'll cut some extension pieces. Okay, so I have my pieces for extending this, and what I did was I made them 5 inches because I wanted to extend it 4 inches. That gives me a 1/2 inch overlap on each side. And what I'm going to do, it is important to note that when you cut the dragon in half, if you look at this, these pieces don't exactly end up straight, and it's because of the curves on the dragon. So you do have to kind of stretch the material a bit when you're working on it. And what I'm going to do is I want this to look nice and clean. So if I go ahead and tape this down with the 1/2 inch of overlap, then the tape will make sure that when I go to do the glue the seam, the glue can't come past that taped piece. So I'll go ahead and tape this all the way around, and then I'll glue it. Now, a similar technique to when you glue, when you're dealing with curves, you can also use the glass jar to stretch and get this to kind of fall the way you want it. Makes it way easier to get the overlap to do what you want it to do. Okay, now I have this new extension piece all taped in. I can basically just flip it over, and one thing I was going to do is I noticed this was a little longer here. I'm going to trim this just a bit. It doesn't need to be that much of an overlap. So I'm going to take my glue. One of the first things I'm going to do is my piece wasn't long enough, so I'm going to glue this together here. This is 2 separate pieces. And if you can kind of get a feel for the flow, then you can kind of just keep doing this continuously. And if you're doing too much, you're gonna squish a lot of glue out. But if you have your flow just right, you'll kind of push glue as you go along this seam. And it makes it real easy. So that'll be the trick to kind of doing this whole piece, is just getting a good flow. So on the outer layer, you do, if you're extending the torso height, so if this is an extended angel dragon, you do have to make different colored sections. So this is where I'm adding 4 inches, actually making a 5-inch panel so that I can have a 1/2 inch overlap on either side. And then I'm gonna do this in 3 different colors so that it lines up with the colors of the body. This is the belly area. And one thing to make sure is that you get the right color, because the upper body is more of a gray blue and then the legs are more of a green blue. So you don't want to use the wrong color because it'll really stand out. Now I'm going to go ahead and tape these things so that it's easy to glue. So I'm going to go ahead, do a 1/2 inch overlap on these pieces. I'm going to use a jar because these seams right here are kind of curvy, so the jar makes it a lot easier to get things to line up. All right, so now I have this blue panel taped off. This is my extension piece. I'm going to put some glue down to do a 1/2 inch overlap. Really put a lot of glue where you've got these multiple layers kind of overlapping, and I've even got a factory seam right here, which is causing a bit of a bump. So really put good pressure and put plenty of glue where these things crisscross so that it's airtight, because this is right where you're definitely going to have a potential leak. So pressure and glue. Then continue working the seam with good pressure, going back and rolling stuff you've previously done, and curving it over the jar as you continue so that it pulls it tight and kind of helps with the curved seam. Even though the piece you cut is not curved, you're dealing with a 3D dragon, and it does have some curves to it. So the jar really, really helps. I came up with a pretty cool way to estimate a person's body size. Before, I had taken newspaper and built like sections of their torso, like their hips or their chest, based on the width, and I'd make that out of cardboard, and then the circumference, and I'd just pack newspapers around there and use packing tape to kind of keep it all together. Well, I thought of a new way, and it seemed to work pretty well. I took some polyethylene tubing. This stuff is what's used typically for like water pipes in new houses these days. This thin stuff is usually what you'd use on like your refrigerator for the ice maker. And I just happen to have some of this stuff, and it's nice because it kind of keeps its shape mostly. You know, I mean, it has rigidity to it, but it's flexible. So this was the guy's waist, 54 inches. His shoulder circumference was also 54. Chest was 46, and then neck was 20. And so what I did was I taped these in the suit to the different positions and ended up with basically sort of a wireframe. And I just had to keep them kind of upright, and then I stuffed, basically I have a whole hamper full of clean laundry, and I just stuffed it in there until it kind of filled this out, and I just made sure that he stayed upright. And then once I was all done, I put some plastic in the back and then created a template. And of course, before I did this, I double checked using a flexible measuring tape and made sure that everything was right before I locked it down and made the template. And so that's it. And hopefully it'll work for him. I made it a little bigger. I actually added a couple of extra inches here and there, so it's not going to be like skin tight on the guy. But anyway, just a cool